I walked into the jewelry store, my hands trembling slightly from the cold. The air inside was warm, but the stares I got from the staff made me feel unwelcome. The store was grand. Shiny glass cases filled with sparkling diamonds, gold necklaces hanging on velvet stands, and watches that looked like they could buy a whole house. I wasn't there to buy anything that day. I just wanted to look. I had always admired fine jewelry, and once upon a time, I could afford it. But life had taken a different turn, and now I didn't look like the kind of man who belonged in such a fancy place. A tall man in a suit, probably the manager, walked up to me with a fake smile. His eyes, however, told a different story. He wasn't happy to see me. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice sharp. "No, thank you. I'm just looking," I replied, keeping my voice polite. His smile disappeared. He glanced at my worn-out coat and scuffed shoes. Then he turned to a young woman behind the counter and whispered something. She giggled. My face burned, but I pretended not to notice. I moved closer to a display of rings, my fingers brushing against the glass. That was when the manager took a step forward, blocking my view. "Sir, we don't allow loitering. If you're not buying anything, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said. I blinked in surprise. "I'm not loitering. I just wanted to admire the jewelry." His expression turned cold. "People like you don't come here just to look." My heart sank. I knew exactly what he meant by people like you. He saw an old man in shabby clothes and assumed I had no money. A security guard appeared at the door, as if he had been waiting for a signal. "Sir, please leave," the manager said again, this time louder, making sure everyone in the store could hear. I glanced around. The other customers were watching, some whispering, some smirking. No one stood up for me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "There's no need to treat me this way," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And there's no need for you to be here," he shot back. Before I could say anything else, the security guard grabbed my arm. Not hard, but firm enough to show me that I had no choice. "Let's go, old man," he said. I felt my legs trembling, not with fear, but with shame. I had never been treated this way before. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. The guard let go of my arm, gave me a warning look, and shut the glass door behind me. I turned back to see the manager and the young woman at the counter laughing. My reflection in the glass stared back at me, an old man with tired eyes, standing alone. For a moment, I felt small, worthless. Then something inside me changed. They thought I was nobody. They thought I was just an old man with no money, no power. They had no idea who I really was. And they were about to find out. I walked away from the jewelry store, my heart heavy. The cold wind brushed against my face, but the sting of humiliation hurt more than the winter air. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the anger and pain inside me. I had been judged because of my clothes, because of how I looked, because they thought I was poor. They had no idea who I really was. As I moved through the mall, memories started flooding my mind, memories of a time when I was not just a simple old man. Many years ago, I was one of the richest businessmen in the city. I had built my company from nothing, starting with just a small shop. Day and night, I worked hard. I treated my customers with respect. I believed that kindness and honesty would bring success. And I was right. My business grew. I opened more stores, and soon, I had an entire company under my name. My life was filled with luxury, expensive cars, designer suits, and a house so big that it sometimes felt empty. But no matter how much money I had, I never forgot where I came from. I came from a poor family. I knew what it was like to struggle, to have people look down on you just because you couldn't afford nice clothes. That's why I always treated people with kindness, no matter who they were. But life is unpredictable. One day, everything changed. My wife, the love of my life, fell sick. I spent every penny I had trying to save her. Hospitals, doctors, medicines. I paid for everything, hoping she would get better. But money couldn't save her. After she passed away, I lost interest in my business. I was too broken, too lost. My so-called business partners saw this as an opportunity. They tricked me, stole my shares, and forced me out of my own company. In just a few months, I lost everything. My wife, my business, my wealth. Now, here I was, walking through a mall like an ordinary old man, wearing simple clothes, just trying to live a quiet life. I never cared about looking rich anymore. I had seen the worst side of life, and material things didn't matter to me anymore. But today was different. The way they had treated me in that jewelry store awakened something inside me. The fire that had died long ago was now burning again. I stopped in front of a large glass window. Inside, a group of young businessmen sat around a table in a cafe, laughing and discussing business deals. I remembered when that used to be me. I used to sit in high-end restaurants, making million-dollar deals over coffee. I had walked away from that world a long time ago, but now I realized something. I wasn't weak. I wasn't powerless. I still had connections. I still had hidden assets that my former partners didn't know about. I still had the mind of a businessman, the same mind that had built an empire from nothing. They thought I was just a poor old man. They had no idea that I was about to change their lives forever. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and made a call. "Hello, James. It's been a long time." On the other end, a familiar voice responded, surprised. "Sir, is that really you?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I need your help. I'm about to make a big move." I hung up, turned around, and walked out of the mall. Tomorrow, everything would be different. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. The laughter of the jewelry store employees still echoed in my head. The humiliation, the stares, the way they treated me like I was worthless. It kept replaying over and over. But I wasn't worthless. I sat up in bed, took a deep breath, and made a decision. I was going to teach them a lesson. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with power, the kind of power they didn't know I still had. I turned on the small lamp beside my bed and reached for my old notebook. Inside were numbers, names, and contacts from my past life. People I had done business with, people who still respected me. My mind was sharp, just as it had been years ago. It was time to use it again. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Sir, is that really you?" "Yes, James," I said calmly. James was one of my most trusted lawyers from the old days. "I need your help. I'm about to make a big move." There was a pause. Then he spoke, his voice filled with excitement. "Tell me what you need, sir." I smiled. This was it. "I want to buy something," I said. "Something big." Setting the plan in motion. The next morning, I met James in his office. He looked at me with respect, not pity. Unlike those people in the jewelry store, he knew who I was. "You really want to do this?" he asked. "Yes," I nodded. "I want to buy them all." James raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold move, but it's possible. The mall is struggling financially. If we make the right offer, we can own it within days." I leaned forward. "Then let's do it." We went over the details. My past business had left me with hidden assets, properties, investments, and bank accounts that I had never touched after losing my company. James had helped manage them all these years. Now they would finally be put to use. With the right strategy, I wouldn't just buy the jewelry store. I would buy everything around it. The purchase begins. James made the calls. Meetings were set. By noon, I was sitting in a high-rise office across from the mall's current owner, a man who looked desperate to sell. "We've been looking for investors," he admitted. "Business isn't great these days." "Then let me take the burden off your hands," I said with a smile. A few signatures, a few transfers, and it was done. By the end of the day, I officially owned the entire shopping mall. The return. The next morning, I walked back into the jewelry store, but this time, everything was different. I wasn't wearing my old coat. I wasn't walking in as a poor, unwanted guest. I was walking in as the owner of the entire place. The same manager who had humiliated me saw me enter. His face went pale. He didn't recognize me at first, but when I stepped closer, his eyes widened in shock. "Sir," he stammered. I smiled. "Good to see you again. I believe we need to have a conversation." The power had shifted, and this was just the beginning. The manager's face turned pale as I stood in front of him. Just yesterday, he had thrown me out like I was nothing. Today, he was struggling to find his words. Sir, is there something I can help you with?" he asked, forcing a nervous smile. I looked around the store. The same employees who had laughed at me yesterday were standing behind the counter, whispering to each other. Some of them avoided my gaze, pretending to be busy. I took a step closer to the manager and said, "Yes, I believe there is." His forehead glistened with sweat. He had no idea what was coming next. "Can we speak in private?" I asked. He nodded quickly and led me to a small office in the back of the store. It was a fancy room with leather chairs and glass shelves filled with expensive watches. As soon as we sat down, I leaned forward and placed a file on his desk. He hesitated before opening it. The moment his eyes scanned the papers inside, his hands began to shake. This is the mall's ownership document," he stuttered. I nodded. "Yes, I bought the mall yesterday. That means I own this store now." His jaw dropped. His fingers gripped the edges of the paper as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. But why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair. "Let me ask you something. Do you treat all your customers the way you treated me yesterday?" He swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I didn't know who you were. If I had known." I raised a hand to stop him. "That's the problem," I said. "You shouldn't treat people based on who they are or what they wear. A true businessman values every customer, no matter how they look." The manager looked down, ashamed. "I made a mistake," he admitted. "I let my pride and judgment get in the way." I nodded. "Yes, you did. And now, things are going to change. A new beginning." The manager sat up straight, worried. "Are you going to fire me?" I took a deep breath. "No, I'm giving you a chance to change." His eyes widened in shock. You're not getting rid of me?" "Not yet," I replied. "But I'm setting new rules. From now on, every employee in this store must treat all customers with respect. No more judging people by their appearance. No more assuming who has money and who doesn't." He nodded quickly. "I understand, sir. I promise I'll do better." I studied him for a moment. "We'll see," I said. I stood up, and he rushed to open the door for me. As I stepped out of the office, the employees looked at me, their faces filled with curiosity and fear. The manager cleared his throat. "Listen up, everyone," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I have an announcement to make." All eyes were on him. "This man is now the owner of this store, and he has a new rule. Every customer, no matter how they look, will be treated with respect." The employees exchanged nervous glances. Some nodded, while others shifted uncomfortably. I looked at them and said, "Remember this. Kindness and respect will bring you more success than judgment ever will." Then, without another word, I turned and walked out of the store. As I stepped into the mall, I felt a sense of satisfaction. This was only the beginning. As I walked out of the jewelry store, I could still feel the heavy silence behind me. The employees were shocked. The manager was shaken. And I felt satisfied. But my work wasn't finished yet. I wanted to make sure that no one in this mall would ever judge a person by their appearance again. The next morning, I returned to the mall, dressed just as I had been the first day. An old coat, simple shoes, nothing fancy. This time, however, the air felt different. I walked past the jewelry store, but I didn't go inside just yet. Instead, I headed toward the mall's main office, where all the business meetings happened. My lawyer, James, was already there, waiting for me with the documents. "Everything is finalized," he said with a smile. "You officially own not just the mall, but also several key stores inside it." I nodded. "Good. It's time to make some changes." Calling a meeting. I asked James to arrange a meeting with all the store owners and managers inside the mall. By noon, they were gathered in the large conference room, whispering among themselves, wondering why they had been called. I stepped forward. Some of them looked at me with confusion. They didn't recognize me. I cleared my throat. "Good afternoon, everyone. I am the new owner of this mall." The room fell silent. Some people gasped. Others exchanged surprised looks. The same jewelry store manager who had thrown me out was sitting at the front. His face turned red as he avoided my eyes. "I know many of you don't know me," I continued, "and I know some of you may be wondering how I got here. Let me tell you a short story." I looked around the room, making sure I had everyone's attention. Then I told them what had happened at the jewelry store, the humiliation, the way I had been treated, and how no one had stepped up to stop it. I may have looked poor that day, but what if I had actually been someone in need? What if I had been a customer willing to buy something but was too afraid to return after being humiliated? I asked. The store owners shifted in their seats, some looking guilty, others thoughtful. This kind of behavior will not be allowed in my mall, I said firmly. From today onward, I am introducing a new rule. Every store in this mall must treat every customer with respect, no matter how they look, no matter what they wear. A man in the back raised his hand. But sir, what if? I held up a hand to stop him. No excuses. This is not a request. It is a rule. If anyone in this mall is caught mistreating a customer based on appearance, their store will face serious consequences. I will not allow this kind of treatment under my ownership. The impact begins. The room was silent. Then, slowly, some of the store owners nodded. A few even clapped. I glanced at the jewelry store manager. His head was down, his hands shaking. He knew this was a lesson for him. As the meeting ended, people walked up to me, shaking my hand, promising to do better. I smiled, knowing that I had already started making a difference. The mall was about to change. And so was the way people treated each other. The meeting ended, but the impact was just beginning. As I walked through the mall, I noticed something different. Store employees who had once ignored customers in simple clothes were now greeting them with a smile. Security guards who had once eyed people suspiciously were now treating everyone with respect. Change had started, and I wasn't done yet. I decided to visit the jewelry store again. As I stepped inside, the atmosphere felt different. The employees who had laughed at me before now stood silently, their expressions nervous. The manager was at the counter, looking down, deep in thought. He noticed me and quickly straightened up. "Sir, welcome," he said, his voice careful, respectful. I nodded and walked to one of the glass cases. The same rings and watches I had admired before still sparkled under the bright lights. "Do you see something you like?" he asked cautiously. I looked at him. "Yes, but today, I am not here to buy." He swallowed hard. "I understand, sir." I could tell he was expecting me to fire him. Maybe he thought I would humiliate him like he had humiliated me, but that wasn't why I was here. I turned to the employees. "Tell me something," I said. "Did you ever stop to think how your behavior affects people?" A young woman at the counter lowered her head. "No, sir," she admitted softly. "Yesterday you laughed at me because of my clothes," I continued. "But what if I had been someone who had just lost everything? What if I had been a man looking for a special gift for his sick wife, using his last bit of savings? Would you still have treated me that way?" The employees exchanged guilty glances. "Every person who walks through these doors has a story," I said. "You don't know what someone is going through. A little kindness can change everything." The room was silent. Then the manager spoke. "You're right, sir," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I let my pride get in the way. I thought money was the most important thing, but I see now that respect and kindness are even more valuable." I studied him for a moment. He seemed sincere. "Then prove it," I said. "From today, this store will not just sell jewelry. It will stand for something greater: respect, fairness, and kindness to every customer, no matter who they are." The manager nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, I promise things will change." I glanced around the store. "I will be watching," I said, my tone firm but not unkind. "Make sure you keep your promise." As I turned to leave, I saw something that warmed my heart. An old man, dressed in simple clothes like I had been that first day, had just walked into the store. One of the employees, the same young woman who had laughed at me before, walked up to him with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, sir," she said kindly. "How can I help you today?" The old man looked surprised at first, then smiled back. "Just looking," he said. "Take your time," she replied. I smiled. The lesson had been learned. And I knew from that day on, this store and this mall would never be the same again. Days passed and the changes in the mall became more noticeable. Employees smiled more, store managers were kinder, and customers who once felt ignored now felt welcome. The atmosphere had shifted from cold and judgmental to warm and inviting. But I knew that real change wasn't just about rules. It was about people learning, growing, and becoming better. One morning, I decided to walk around the mall again, not as the owner, but as an observer. I wore my old coat, just like the first time, blending in with the crowd. I wanted to see if the store owners and employees had truly learned their lesson. A surprising encounter. As I strolled past the shops, I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me, sir. May I help you?" I turned around and saw the young woman from the jewelry store, the same one who had laughed at me the first day. But this time she wasn't laughing. She was smiling warmly, her tone filled with kindness. "You work at the jewelry store, right?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes, sir. I also help in other stores sometimes. Do you need anything?" I looked at her carefully. There was no trace of the arrogance she once had. Instead, she seemed sincere. "Why are you being so kind to me today?" I asked. She hesitated, then sighed. "Because I learned my lesson. That day, when you told us how our actions affect others, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I realized how many people I might have hurt in the past. I don't want to be that person anymore." Her words made me smile. This was what I had hoped for, not just a change in rules, but a change in hearts. "I'm proud of you," I said. Her eyes widened. "You are?" "Yes," I nodded. "It takes courage to admit mistakes, and even more courage to change. Keep treating people with kindness, and you will go far in life." Her face lit up, and she bowed slightly. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." An unexpected gift. As I continued walking, I noticed a small kiosk near the mall entrance. An elderly man sat there, selling handmade bracelets and necklaces. His clothes were simple, and his hands looked rough from years of hard work. Customers passed by without noticing him. Some glanced at his table, but quickly moved on. I walked up to him and smiled. "Good morning, sir. How's business?" The old man sighed. "Not great, son. People don't seem interested in simple things like these anymore. They want expensive brands." I picked up a bracelet. It was beautifully woven, simple yet elegant. "This is amazing work," I said. "How long does it take to make one?" "A few hours," he said, his eyes lighting up at my interest. "I do it all by hand." I nodded. "I'd like to buy everything on your table." The old man blinked. "Everything?" "Yes," I smiled. "And not just that. From today, you will have a proper shop inside this mall. I'll give you a space where people can see and appreciate your hard work." Tears welled up in his eyes. "But why would you do that for me?" I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because kindness goes a long way, and I believe in giving people a chance." The old man wiped his eyes and grasped my hand. "Thank you, sir. You've changed my life today." As I walked away, I knew I had done the right thing. Real success isn't about wealth. It's about lifting others up. And this was just the beginning of something even greater. The old man's teary eyes stayed in my mind as I walked through the mall. His gratitude reminded me why I had done all of this. Not for revenge, not to prove a point, but to bring real change. I knew that wealth alone didn't make a person great. It was how they used it that truly mattered. That evening, I called a meeting with all the store owners and managers in the mall once again. They sat in the conference room, eager but curious. The jewelry store manager was there, along with many others who had witnessed the transformation happening around them. I stood in front of them and spoke with a calm but firm voice. "Today marks the beginning of a new era for this mall," I said. "We are not just here to make money. We are here to build a place where every customer feels welcome, where respect is given to all, and where kindness is the foundation of our business." The room was silent, everyone listening closely. "I have decided to create a special program," I continued. "Each month, we will select a store that has shown the best customer service, kindness, and respect. That store will receive a reward, extra support, better promotion, and recognition throughout the mall." The store owners exchanged excited looks. It was a challenge, but one worth accepting. "But there's more," I said. "We will also set up a small fund to support struggling local businesses and individuals. We will give space in this mall to hardworking people, like the old man selling handmade bracelets outside. No one should be ignored just because they don't have a big brand name. A soft murmur spread through the room. Some store owners smiled, nodding in agreement. The jewelry store manager stood up slowly. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "I just want to say thank you." I looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "I thought I knew everything about business," he admitted. "But I was wrong. You showed me that respect and kindness bring more success than greed ever will. I promise I will run my store differently from now on." A few people clapped. I smiled. "That's all I wanted to hear," I said. "This is not just about me. It's about all of us. If we build this mall with respect and fairness, we will not only succeed, but also make a difference in people's lives." The true reward. In the weeks that followed, I saw the mall transform completely. Customers noticed the difference too. More people started visiting, not just because of the products, but because they felt welcome. The jewelry store became one of the top-selling stores in the mall, not because of expensive ads, but because of the way they treated their customers. The manager had learned his lesson, and his employees followed his example. The old man I had helped now had his own small shop inside the mall. His handmade bracelets and necklaces became popular, and customers lined up to buy them. He couldn't stop smiling every time I passed by. One day, as I walked through the mall, a little boy ran up to me. "Mister, are you the man who made this mall better?" he asked, holding his mother's hand. I chuckled. "Well, I just gave it a little push." His mother smiled warmly. "Thank you," she said. "Because of you, people like us feel safe and respected here." I nodded, my heart full. I had come here as just a man in an old coat, ignored and humiliated. But I was leaving as someone who had made a difference. And that was worth more than all the money in the world.